Welcome everyone to this plenary discussion. Please take a seat if you haven't done so already. I'm Alexander Paulsson, by the way, and I will be sharing this plenary discussion. But before we start with that, I would like to make two announcements regarding tomorrow. Tomorrow morning there will be a keynote speech in this room. But to enter the building, you have to come from the street. Only that entrance is open tomorrow morning. The entrance towards the park will be closed. And tomorrow, fika, the coffee break, will only be here in this building. Coffee will only be served out here, not at Wekken. So over to the plenary here. We will talk about money, finance, and degrowth. And money is somehow shaping, or is shaping, the current economic system in various ways. And both as an unintended consequence of how we use money as a medium of exchange, but also the way money is used as a measurement of value. Please have a seat so we can begin the plenary discussion. And this is no news, of course. But in the degrowth debates and degrowth scholarship and the degrowth movement, money has been discussed and critically assessed from various different points of view. And the critical question has been not so much what money is, but what money does. What money does to our relationships as a community and our socio-ecological relationships with the environment. And tonight we will discuss money from these critical points of view, and we will hear Bjerg here from Copenhagen Business School, who has written extensively about money, talk about banking and how money is produced. And after that, we will hear Ruby van der Wekken talk about time banking and the experience of being engaged in time banking, amongst other things. And finally, we will hear Hornborg talk about money and how money can be redesigned to meet social and environmental objectives, which are much in line with the degrowth objectives, I would dare to say. So, without further ado, I'll leave the floor to Ole.
So, yes, thank you very much. I am very grateful to the organizers for this opportunity to talk to you tonight. I'm also extremely impressed by this venue. I have this secret fantasy of being a stand-up comedian. I can't do that, but right now I feel a little bit like a stand-up comedian, so I'm very happy. Since we're in Sweden, I want to talk about the Swedish central bank, Riksbanken, which is my favorite central bank in the world. I don't know if you can have, you can have favorite central bank. At least I have favorite central banks, and mine is Riksbanken. I think a key question at this conference and in the theme of this conference is the following question. How do we organize our economies in a way where they can remain stable while not growing or even degrowing? I think that's a very crucial question in this conference or in this problem with degrowth. And I also think that Riksbanken, they hold a key piece in this puzzle. I will tell you what this piece is later. But even Riksbanken, even though they hold this piece, they don't quite know it. So they need our help, especially your help, those of you who are Swedes, which I will also come back to. And of course, all of this has to do with money. As Alexander said, that's my intellectual interest is money. So what characterizes our current money system is that what we've done, not necessarily intentionally, or I think some had the intention, but not all of us. What we've done is that we've privatized the creation of money, which means that today most of the money in circulation, the vast majority of money in circulation today are digital money. And the way this kind of money comes into the economy is through private banks. So today, money is created by private banks, and they come into the economy when we borrow money in the bank. So when we borrow money in the bank does two things. It creates debt with one hand, so we owe money to the bank, and then they create money with the other hand, which is, in a sense, or not in a sense, it is, money is the debt of the banks to us. So whenever we create money, we also create debt. And what this does, what then happens in the economy is that the debt tends to grow faster than the money because of interests. And furthermore, money also has a tendency to sort of concentrate in different sectors or different areas of the economy. And what this amounts to, or what this means, is that ultimately, or if we look at the sort of the macroeconomy, there's not enough money to pay back the debts to the bank. There's always too little money. And the reason why there's too little money, it's not because there's not enough money to buy the stuff we need. No, it's because there's not enough money to pay back this debt that we owe to the banks. And this is very intimately linked to growth, because in order to, I was going to say solve this problem, it's not a very good solution, but what we then do in order to keep this system going is that we then create more money. There's not enough money. Oh, we need to create more money. So we need to, the banks have to create more money. But then in doing so, they also create more debt. And then we have this sort of vicious circle with more debt, more money, more debt, more interests, and then more money to pay it back, and then more debt and more interests. And then that just keeps going. And in order for that to keep going, we need at least the fantasy of perpetual growth. That's why when we organize our economy, at least under this current monetary system, we kind of have to organize it in a way where we make sure that the economy keeps growing. Okay, so now let me turn to Riksbanken. So the Swedish Riksbank, it's the oldest central bank in the world. This year, they're celebrating their 350th anniversary. And they were the first central bank in the world to create paper money. So this happened about 350 years ago. And what's happening today is that Riksbanken, they've launched what they call an e-krone project. Let me just, out of curiosity, how many people in here have heard about the e-krone? Okay, some. Yeah. Okay. So, this e-krone project, what this e-krone project is about, is actually that if they launch this, and they're quite serious about it. They haven't decided it finally, but they're quite serious about it. And if they do decide to move forward with this, they can become the first central bank in the world to issue digital money, which can be held by the general public. So that's quite revolutionary. Although their reasons for doing it may not be, they're good reasons, but they may not be revolutionary reasons. So what does this actually mean? What is this e-krone, and how does it differ from our ordinary digital money? Well, an e-krone is basically that the way our monetary system works today, the only institutions that are allowed to have an account with the central bank are commercial banks. So private individuals like you and I, we cannot have an account with the central bank. So, which means that if we want to make electronic payments, we have to go through a commercial banks. So, but with an e-krone, that would change. So the Riksbanken would open up its balance, we could say, open up its system so that we can have, or I couldn't probably because I'm not a Swede, but those of you who are Swedes, you can have an account then with the with the Riksbank, and that would be a debit account. So it's not like you can borrow money from Riksbanken, but you can have your money there. And in a way, it's very new because it's digital, but it's in monetary terms, it's actually just the same as a banknote, like a physical paper note, which is also a credit directly with the central bank. So that's one thing. The other thing about an e-krone is that since it's the central bank that issues this e-krone, it can send it into circulation. It can decide to send it into circulation without creating debt at the same time. It can decide to spend it into the economy. That would the Riksbank would probably not do it itself. It would probably give it to the government, and then the government could send it into the economy by spending it, public investments. They could lower taxes or do many different things. But the key point here is what we're doing here is we have this, like we could kind of say that there's a Gordian knot in the contemporary money system where we have the creation of money is sort of tied to the creation of debt. And what this e-krone can do is that it can cut this Gordian knot, so we separate it, so we can have money without debt. But as I was kind of hinting at before, Riksbanken are not fully aware of the true potential of this e-krone. When they talk about it, what they're talking about is just like, oh yeah, we want an additional means of payment. We need it for small payments. So what they're trying to do, or what they want to do, is that they kind of want to launch it, but they don't want to really disturb or do something with the existing banking system. They kind of want that in place, and then they just want this added feature. Which, for starters, is good enough for me. I think as long as we just get this thing going, we can always scale it up and do all kinds of funny things with it. But I will argue that if they go ahead with this e-krone thing, the potential of this is as big as the invention of paper money. If you look into the history of central banks, you will soon discover that there's intimate links between the evolution of central banks and wars. So many of the first and also even the subsequent experiments with paper money was about financing wars. I think even the Swedish Riksbank, when they started doing this, made the first paper money, I think they actually used it to beat the Danes. And what this tells us, what this says, this relation between wars and money creation, it says something about the power of money creation. So when you create this paper money and use it to finance war, what you're actually doing is that you kind of using or concentrating or mobilizing the economic powers of the community, of the society, and then you use it for war. But the point here is that there are if you sort of monetary inventions or money itself, there's such a big power in money creation. So what we need to do, or what one can do, is that one can harness this power and then use it for other things. You can use it for wars, but you can also use it for other things. And if we want to make the kind of transformation that we're talking about in this conference, I think we can all agree that we need to mobilize very strong powers. And to do that, we need to mobilize the powers that are in the money system. So I will end here with an encouragement to all of you, but especially to those of you who are from Sweden. I encourage you, you must look into this e-krone project. It's really, really, really important. And I know when you look at it first, you think, oh, it's very boring, very, and maybe it's not boring. It's extremely important. You must look into this. And once you've kind of looked into it, you have to help Riksbanken. You have to help them because they need your help. They need sort of political mobilization. First of all, I think they're going to make the decision next year, they've said. And I think the banks are kind of catching on to this e-krone. I think first they kind of ignored it, but I think now they're catching on to it. and I think they're kind of noticing it's not going to be good for them. So so they're kind of start pushing. But you have to help the Riksbank to push the other way. Say we want an 8 krone, and then subsequently you should also sort of help them sort of realize and also help mobilize around this idea, so that not only do you get the 8 krone, but you can sort of start realizing all of the potentials that you will have in this new kind of money. And I can tell you, it is a big deal. So I follow these debates. It's something that's going on in Europe and also in the rest of the world. Central banks right now, they're talking about this in many countries. And a lot are looking to Sweden because they've been sort of the first ones to sort of seriously go into this. So if you can pull it off here in Sweden, you will not only be helping yourself, but you will also be helping a lot of other people, including myself, because of course I also want an 8 krone in Denmark. Our central bank is it's not my favorite central bank, of course, and it's not even number 2. I can tell you. My central bank is among the most conservative central banks in the world, and central banks as such are conservative, so you can see that they're really, So, but I'm sure that if you can help the Swedish Riksbank to pull this off, I think the likelihood of something similar happening in Denmark will be much greater. So I really encourage you to look into this. I think that's kind of my 2 cents. Yeah. Thank you for your attention.
Good evening. Thank you for having me in this discussion. I've had a great week here, and learning a lot from many of the sessions that have been with, and for sure with you, I've been having a great time. I'm standing in front of you as they call it in the conferences, a practitioner, an activist. With a learning school and processes like the World Social Forum, a lot believing in the learning from the Global South. As already mentioned, 10 years ago there started a process with our Helsinki Time Bank, which besides being a wonderful process in itself, also has wanted to really play a progressive voice with regards to the issue of complementary currencies, also in Finland. And then today, I basically, on a day-to-day basis, I work on a farm where our CSA is working and where we are producing food bags. And yes, speaking out of these experiences. And this has basically led me to be also a person who, along with the increasing amount of people, indeed are seeing that if you want to talk about other economies, we definitely need to talk about other forms of money. And already it has been put on the table. Why is it so that this is a problem? This ever-growing debt, these loans which are issued against activities that are actually only bringing us into a lot of further problems, fueling an extractivist economy, and forcing us to increasingly commodify more and more of life. And then, as said also already, this debt-based money system, I mean, it's shaping our relations. This is the problem. So it is, it's basing relations on notions of scarcity and then causing competitions, and of course producing a lot of inequality. We know this. So then part of the movement that is basically wanting to strengthen a critique of this, of course, one level to look at this is to say that we should be pushing forward much more demonetization. And so if we want to talk about a commons economy and we want to go beyond creation of scarcity, so money as we know it has no place, and we should really talk about demonetization. So the whole issue of exchange then is contested, right? And it wants to organize on basis of principles like stigmergy, and believes that we can really cooperate very well together like that. And this is absolutely something I also believe in, and I think that there are many probably here who exactly believe that we need to push for more in that direction. But of course it also poses questions with regards to in how inclusive processes can we then come to. I mean, this might work well for in certain spaces, including some of us, but then it might be also so that we still need some sort of exchange tools to do more, or to go beyond the borders of our communities, etc., where we are not yet having these relations in which everything is working well. So then it comes so that there can be a strand that wants to look then at redesigning the role of money, or then to redesign money itself as a commons. And now I think that the previous, I'm sorry, I don't think I'm going to say your name now directly correct. Ole, yes.
Yes, no,
Yes,
yeah.
Talked indeed about that how can we be redesigning then how banks are functioning. And then there's another strand that really wants to look at redesigning currency as a commons, and that then wants to see about how can we redesign currency so as they foster human relationships. So under that strand then comes our experience of Helsinki Time Bank. And we started close to 10 years ago. It was a very spontaneous process. And there's, I think, somebody else in the room here also that was there 10 years ago. And it basically came out of the frustrations with yet another climate summit there. It was Copenhagen then. And we were thinking about our local neighborhood and wanted to come to something else. Well, a little bit time came by, and we wanted to try for a local currency, and that then at some point became our Helsinki Time Bank, because we thought that the Time Bank, the fact that you say that everybody's work, everybody's needs, everybody's time is of equal worth, I mean, that felt to be such an incredible, radical proposal for a local currency. We wanted to engage with that. So that is the basic principle of time banking, as you might also know. And then if we talk about what kind of services are exchanged between people in a time bank, it could be anything. It really could be anything. Classically, of course, the examples are there of things from babysitting to cutting hair, or you could be learning language, you could be learning how to swim, you could do all kind of things. You could also loan products, or loan, for instance, your car in a time bank. Different things are possible. So we are operating on the community exchange systems, an online network, and it basically means that if you join the time bank, everybody has their own account. In the system, you can be seeing what kind of help is needed. You could see if you want to respond to that, or perhaps you yourself have a need and you can put it out there. Once you have performed a service for somebody, you can then go to that person's accounts and you can deduct time credits from that person's account. In our time bank, those time credits are called tovis, which is meaning a moment. So basically, the system, it's all open, so it's kind of like a transparent bank. You can see all the exchanges that are happening, and how everybody is operating there. This community exchange systems is fascinating. It's the largest network still up to date in the world, where there are both time banks and also local currencies operating, so where they do price. And it has been developed by a very interesting person called Tim Jenkins. He was a anti-apartheid activist, and he has also been jailed, and he has freed himself and comrades out of Pretoria prison by making 15 keys, unlocking 15 doors, you can imagine. He has been restored. He has been awarded for his endeavors when he was operating undercover for the ANC, and he then started to build this local exchange system, first in a very local neighborhood in Johannesburg. And from there out, it grew and grew and grew, and is today this community exchange systems where there are hundreds of groups functioning. So we started in 2009, and some years later, we already had some 3,000 people that registered in the time bank. They didn't all do exchanges. Some of them only did one, but at the moment we have come to some bit more than 30,000 hours which have been exchanged in this time bank. We're not an organization, we are not registered, and I guess the main motive for that is that why would we need to do so? It's not about money. We don't need any money, so we haven't felt the need to register ourselves. Now, worldwide, there are thousands of these kind of time banks that enable people to exchange services. But their developmental process, that's what makes them unique. They're all a little bit different, exactly in terms of like how do they relate to economy and how do they see their role in society. Also in our time bank. And there can be differences also of an opinion in a time bank. If you, for instance, in our time bank, when we have done a kind of a circle asking people, what is this time bank according to you about? Somebody's going to say that wants to know their neighbor better. Somebody else is going to say that they really enjoy that in a time bank you can do actually different things than you can normally do in volunteers work. Normally when you join an organization, you're asked to do some volunteers work. It will be specific tasks. In a time bank, actually you can find yourself doing or becoming part of projects that would normally not be possible. And then for other people, and I guess I belong to those, it's a way to be thinking of another financial system and to make some cracks in the system. We've also had frustrating moments that people said, excuse me, but if I go to wash the windows of my neighbor, what does that have to do with another financial system? I mean, excuse me. And it gave some heated debate because we thought that we needed to come to one definition. But then we understood that these things can very well coexist, parallel to each other. Of course, that is different when there comes conflict, pressure from outside, but I return to that a bit later. Time banks, in any case, they have to somehow define themselves and draw borders. Mostly that means also draw borders about what kind of activity can happen in the time bank and what not. And that counts basically for every complementary currency. So I would now just want to put two things up front that have come to conclude and that have found that are really important when we want to talk about any kind of complementary currency. Is it a time bank or is it a local currency? First of all, and I guess I'm also saying this because also in Helsinki there are different processes happening and there are certain elements in the discussion that according to me are really missing. So first of all, it needs to be made explicit for what economy. So we were frequently asked that, so how do you see this time bank? Finland is not many people, right? So you do something and there comes a lot of attention and a lot of media attention. So we were asked that, what do you think about the economy? Are you seriously suggesting that a whole economy is going to be operating like a time bank? And things that's the way they tease you, right? But so what was inspirational for myself and also others was the whole notion of solidarity economy building. And put in a simple way, and that's why it's so empowering, is basically that solidarity economy puts on the table that economy is nothing else than the way we organize our daily lives, right? And it should be a discussion of everybody for everybody. And then it goes on to say that if you put on the right lenses, we can all around us see activities that are having other motives than profit-making up front, layers of activities. And those other values, they are those beautiful values of direct democracy, of shared power, ecology, equality. And then further, that if we are connecting those different activities, we really can be growing another economy from the bottom up. And it's not about just a sector of economy, but it's something that can influence the entire discussion of economy. And in this process then, the objective of then this economy is the reproduction of social life according to just values. Important then also comes in the commons. Commons are a part of solidarity economy. But also, if we think of solidarity economy being that connecting of different actors together who then engage in more cooperation, what we are also getting is more commons and more commoning, importantly, around them. When you're a food cooperative and your energy cooperative and your currency complementarity, they start to interact. Your food, your energy, your currency becomes more of a common. So that felt really what an envisioning that our time bank belonged to. And that exactly this paradigm shift of talking of solidarity economy building, and through this a furthering of our commons and commoning is much what feel that here then also the contribution is towards degrowth. Degrowth also, of course, if we think of a time bank, that what is the difference between how things operate in our market? I mean, it's of course exactly the fact that our time in the market is not valued equally as it is in a time bank. So of course, we can relate with that to degrowth. But so then, it were these discussions of solidarity economy, making it explicit that we should talk about the values of what kind of economy it is that we want to be promoting, that we then also drew up our ABC, a kind of principles of what our time bank is about. And that was in a very intensive process of deliberation. So we put down the values, that what kind of values must you have, must an actor have, like an organized actor, so for instance cooperatives also, or other actors that want to be joining the time bank. And then so we came to define ourselves as such that the objective of our time bank is to support mutual assistance between people, and through this then strengthen a communal culture. But it also, our time bank also strengthens a social and ecological local just economy in which everyone is of equal value and has equal participation possibility. And I think it was well said by Vincent Leglay the other day when was saying that actually, so what does this point to? That it's the whole thing is not whether a currency technically works, but actually that it's bringing people together to really discuss how things are produced, why, how, and for what kind of use. And that is very much coming forward also out of this example. So that's one thing. We should determine like for what economy. But then secondly, this notion of currency as a commons, and this meaning also the commoning around them. So we have always tried to be a platform of deliberation. So we are organized in this way that there's a core group who has their regular meetings. It's open to all members. It prepares the things that are up front, and then any kind of bigger decisions they are made with the whole time bank, either by voting or commenting online about things. And so, for instance, we developed an internal taxation mechanism. Of course, taxation, you can imagine, of course, also in Finland, welfare state, all the discussions, of course, the issue of taxation was already very fast put to us. So we developed a time tax in our time bank. So basically it means that if you, when you have done a service, you receive your credit, but you actually receive a little bit less. There's a very small percentage of that time credit, which will be going to a solidarity economy actor in the time bank that you have chosen. So it's a way, you could say, to see that the taxation there is developing a solidarity economy through the time bank. What, of course, happened with us was that in 2013, after a certain process, we ran into problems regarding taxation. A longer story, but the end result of that process was that there came out taxation guidelines in 2013 on our time bank, all time banks in Finland. By that time, there were some 40 time banks established in the community exchange systems. And those guidelines said that, put it simple, if you receive a professional service in the time bank, you should be paying taxation on it in euros, of course. A precedent. We really set a precedent with that in Finland. A pity. of course, a pity, because that, of course, changed things. In a way, you can say, well, that is ridiculous. It's very clear that it, of course, put a negative spotlight on us, created a lot of confusion, and also, of course, it did prevent more organized actors from coming on board with us. So you can very clearly, if you look at the statistics, you can see that till November 2013, things were on the rise, more actors were joining us, we had more exchanges, and after that, there has come a very clear slump. We are still standing, but such is the case. And this proposal, or I mean, the way we operate with this time tax has also been something that we have wanted to put forward to the public sphere. I mean, you could be imagining that a public actor would be taking part in the time bank, and we could actually then come to think of a commodifying of the private sphere, I mean of the public sphere, instead of privatizing it. And well, I don't know, we've had a lot of state discussions here. Still would like to think that if in our states, like in Finland, what we can still call somewhat of a welfare state, perhaps there it would be more possible to think of this fantastic notion of a partner state. No, a partner state which is like providing basics for its citizens and at the same time is wanting to give them more infrastructure to come to co-creation. We haven't talked a lot here about co-creating. There's been a defending of the state for logic reasons, but of course there's also something which could be opening up great possibilities for us if we want to talk about a commodifying of the public sphere in which solidarity economy actors and the commons would be playing a role. So you could imagine a public actor in the time bank working with this time tax, and perhaps it could be so that people could be spending a part of their time in places where they really would want to be, and that in that way you could have transformation of the public sphere. And this is a dialogue we want to do with the city. So what put forward is that the time bank as a platform basically for commoning. It's almost like a pedagogical tool to teach us how to common. So this is then this little bit of a funny notion of money, if your currency, as a pedagogical tool for commoning. That's perhaps not the way we normally look at money. Yes. Yeah, so those both things, so important when looking at a currency, that to put explicit about what economy are we talking, and then that we allow for that hard work, that blood, sweat and tear of commoning around our currency. And a last point still, as many of us here and as in many sessions inspired, of course, by Barcelona, also in this. Perhaps it has been out there that in Barcelona there is the Department for Solidarity Economy Building in the city. And there is, in parallel to that, there is a platform of citizens who is in dialogue and discusses about what things should be happening. And it's really an exciting idea that they're starting up a local currency there, which exactly this platform is going to be governing in a democratic manner. And there's an economist there, Susana Belmonte, who has been working out an idea which connects very closely to also our time tax. And that's the idea of a basic income partly funded by a time tax. So in one more minute, imagine that you could be opting for a basic income. And then imagine that that would be, and this is not everybody will enjoy this notion, but imagine that it would then be so that you would be having a debt in hours. But this would be meaning that there would be a democratic citizens process ongoing, where citizens would be talking about what are those common good projects in society that we would like to see realized. For instance, our local community-supported agriculture cooperatives or other places like that. And then it could be so that you who have gotten the basic income, you could be deciding that which of those projects you would like to commit yourself to in order to be paid the complementary currency with which you would be paying off your debt. So the time credits, right? So the idea is here that with this basic income, you're kicking into life a complementary currency, which would be for common good projects. I think it's an interesting idea, an enthusing idea to think of this combination of things. And yes, leaving you with that one.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. Many of you were here last night for the plenary session, and there was a rather heated debate about the politics of degrowth and what it might look like. That's a debate that we've been struggling with for a very long time. What I would like to propose is that we need to transform our very concept of politics, our very conception of politics, by recognizing the power of artifacts to organize social life. And in consequence with that in order to change society, which we all want to do, we need to redesign our artifacts. But before I get into this, I have to give you a glimpse of the personal context that I'm in right now. Because when I left that plenary debate yesterday and started walking over to the railway station, I started my mobile phone because I thought it was a good idea to shut it off while the session was on. And I found an SMS from my wife. And she was telling me that the farm where she and I have been living for about 42 years, it's on the east coast of Sweden, was on fire. There was a forest fire on my farm. And I just want to tell you that it's sort of difficult to concentrate on a degrowth conference while your forest is burning. And of course, it struck me that this is climate change. We have had hardly any rain at all for the past 3 months. We've had a horrible drought, as many of you in Europe will know. And of course, this fire would not have occurred were it not for the drought and the lightning that followed it a couple of days ago. So at this moment, my forest is burning. The world out there is literally burning. And climate change is more than an abstract discourse about power relations, economics, and so on. It's very much about how we feel and what's going to happen to us. And this is one reason why I'm going to be following my notes, because otherwise I'll be talking to you about forest fires, and I don't want to do that. I just wanted to give you the sort of personal context of this talk. I do actually think that money is very relevant for these things, because ultimately, I guess what I want to tell you is that I think money, or as anthropologists like me want to say, general purpose money, is what is driving climate change. It's the very reason why this planet may not be inhabitable for humans a century from now. So I don't think money is a trivial thing. It's an extremely central thing to talk about, not least for the degrowth movement. I think all of us attending a degrowth conference realize that business as usual would end in disaster. I think that's probably a reason why many of us are here. And I don't think we need to spend much time to convince each other about that anymore. Okay, we know that Rockström has shown all these planetary boundaries. We know that things are looking bad. And the question is what we can do to avoid disaster. And that means establishing what the problem is. And paradoxically, I don't think we're quite clear yet about what the problem is. Many of us would say growth. Sure, fine. Many would say capitalism as a shorthand for this abstract system that we continue to challenge. 70 years, 160 years after Karl Marx. Some would say globalization. Some would say the market, like Karl Polanyi and his followers. Some would say neoclassical economics. That's what most people in ecological economics would say. It's the economists, it's their fault. It's this idea of growth. They have to rethink economics. And some sociologists would even say that the problem is modernity, modern society. And now I have the utmost respect for all these discourses, and there are libraries about each one of these topics: capitalism, growth, globalization, markets, modernity. We can spend several lifetimes just trying to orient ourselves in those libraries. But I would actually argue that all of these phenomena are the results of one single, more fundamental problem, which tends to remain the invisible elephant in the room. Because it's like water to fish, we just don't see it, and that's why we don't talk about it. It's this very weird idea and artifact of general purpose money. The assumption that anything you have can be exchanged for anything else. No other species on this planet could have come up with such a strange notion. But then no other species is about to make the planet uninhabitable. Now, is that a coincidence? To grasp how money indeed is the root of all evil, as the saying goes, and that's a saying that goes back at least 2,000 years, we need to accept the claim of so-called actor network theory. Can you raise your hands, those who have heard that before? Actor network theory? Okay, good, good. That artifacts do intervene in social life. Now, they don't have agency. I don't think we should go that far. I think that would be to fetishize them. But they do have very significant consequences for our social life. You all know this. You have an iPhone, right? You know how artifacts intervene in our daily lives and how difficult it is to disentangle our lives from those objects. What about your credit cards? What about losing your wallet? How desperate do you get? We know that these things, these objects around us, they are important for our social lives and social relations. Now, artifacts, by definition, are invented by humans. But then we let them take control over us. We delegate the destiny of world society and the biosphere to these things and ideas that we have created. This is actually what Karl Marx called fetishism. He knew exactly what the problem was. Our tools become our masters. They compel us to behave in certain ways. The aggregate logic of these compulsions, these imperatives that are inscribed in the inertia of money, is capitalism. Basically, everyone wants to pay as little as they can for what they buy and want to charge as much as they can for what they sell. It's not more complex than that. Karl Marx talked about greed or avarice as inherent in money. There can be no greed without money. Okay, and this logic, I mean, this is very simple and rather natural human logic, leads to globalization, as it's been called now for some decades. And what does globalization do? What does it encourage? It encourages low wages in some parts of the world. It encourages lax environmental legislation in some parts of the world, because low wages and lax environmental legislation are comparative advantages, right? That's what the economists would argue, I think. Or competitive advantages. Well, China learned that, for example. Low wages are really good for business. So, general purpose money, I would say, compels economists to use a neoliberal or neoclassical discourse to justify these processes, calling them efficient and rational. And we've been seeing this particularly over the past 4 or so decades, since the 1980s. General purpose money generates the social condition of modernity also. This we have known ever since Simmel wrote The Phenomenon of Money. And Anthony Giddens more recently wrote this book, The Consequences of Modernity, where he argues basically, at least if you read between the lines, that it's the kind of abstraction and disembeddedness that derives from money that creates our modern condition, that creates us as persons. Interchangeable, detached, abstract, just like the money that rules our lives. It creates us, and we create and reproduce it. General purpose money propels growth, yes, we know that. And it really isn't all that different from the logic in a game of Monopoly. I'm sure most of you have played Monopoly at some point. For most of the players in a game of Monopoly, the game will end in disaster. Right? Okay, but it's just a game, you might say. Sure. But so is the world economy. It's a gigantic board game. The winners don't win because they're evil. I don't agree that we have to shoot the capitalists. It's not a question of good people and evil people. That would make the struggle much easier. No, they win because of the rules. Because of the rules and the artifacts that are used in this global game. And those rules have been written by humans. They're not like the laws of thermodynamics. They're social constructions, and this is actually fortunate because it means they can break down, like we saw in the Wall Street collapse. Money can just dissolve into air. So I think that's the major optimistic point I want to convey to you. That's what I'm hoping for, that we'll realize that money is just a bubble, and once that bubble is gone, you know, we'll really know what reality is and how we should deal with it. The pieces in the game, the checkers, so to speak, have been designed by humans. But it's symptomatic of fetishism that we find it hard to even imagine that those pieces can be redesigned and that the rules can be rewritten. But they can. They can be rewritten. And I think this is a psychological problem, because I think that once we begin to see the alternatives, we may accept that the problem is money itself. So we need to see some kind of solution before we accept the problem. As long as we don't think there is an alternative, we're not going to accept that description of the problem. I think this is part of our dilemma. Our lives have been governed by general purpose money for only a few centuries, while humans have been around for hundreds of thousands of years without destroying the biosphere. What can we learn from our history. What is it about general purpose money that within a few centuries brings us to the brink of disaster? You will find in your dictionary that the word liquidate has two meanings. One is to convert into cash. I saw that in my dictionary the other day. The other is to destroy. I think that's significant. To turn into cash and to destroy, same word, liquidate. By making all values interchangeable, general purpose money dissolves the kind of distinctions on which all living systems depend. Between the short term and the long term, the small scale and the large scale, the trivial and the essential. It makes it possible to trade rainforests for Coca-Cola, that's a favorite joke of mine, and coral reefs for iPhones. And we think it's the most natural thing in the world. Yeah, sure, of course. But if we really want degrowth, if we want to get away from capitalism, we have to redesign money. And of course, your immediate question is, but can it be done? Yes, and I would argue that there's no other way short of disaster. Now, I'm going to do some, what's it called? Shameless self-promotion, I think. If you want to see my proposal for how we could redesign money, and I won't have time to get into that now, there's an open access journal called the Journal of Political Ecology. And last year I published a piece in that journal called How to Turn an Ocean Liner. And it's even got 25 FAQs, frequently asked questions. So all the questions you have probably will be answered in that, or some of them at least. But you may want to download that to see what I mean. But I'll very, very, very briefly, and I realize time is short, I'll very briefly just say what my argument in that article is. It would be perfectly feasible to distinguish between two kinds of money. Now, I told you I'm an anthropologist, and if we go back to the basics of economic anthropology, we learned from Karl Polanyi, Paul Bohannon, and these people, these anthropologists, that the idea of having just one metric, one scale of values, is historically recent. As recently as in the 1950s, there were people in West Africa who had 3 different kinds of markets, and they didn't like converting between them. They had a multi-centric economy with different values. And I'm not saying we can just, whole scale take that economy and model ours on it, but the principle is interesting. We can create an economy that has more than one value in it, that distinguishes between the short term and the long term, the local and the global, and so on. And my idea is that each national authority could issue a complementary currency which can only be used to buy transport-certified goods and services originating within a particular radius from the point of purchase, and distribute it to all citizens as a basic income. So I want to combine complementary currency with basic income. But the complementary currency, you may think, okay, he's just talking about local currencies. But if maybe we can talk about that in the discussion, but this is not a local currency scheme. I'm pretty disappointed with local currency schemes because they don't do anything about globalization. You can go into Bristol and buy stuff with a Bristol pound, and the stuff may come from China. It doesn't matter. So, in other words, local currencies do not stop globalization. But if you have a money that can only be used for locally produced commodities and services, then you're doing something about globalization. And I'm going to finish by saying that this change would have 3 major consequences. All values would no longer be interchangeable. And in changing the conditions for human behavior, such an economy would radically transform consumer practices. Much of the market would localize rather than globalize. And I know this is a central degrowth goal. Finally, human time, our lives, would no longer be a commodity. We would no longer be in a proletarian condition. Okay, thank you. I'll finish there. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank all of you for great and very inspiring talks. And I and you look forward to questions from the audience, but I have a few questions here to warm up you a bit. You mentioned, Alf, here the local currency experiments, which have been kind of popping up in different places around the globe, basically. And in Lund, where I work, there used to be a local currency as well. So I'm curious to hear from all of you, basically, why do you think these fail? Or, I mean, because at some point, many of these currencies dissolve, or they stop to be in circulation and used. So what are your thoughts about these failures, if I may use that word? Do you have any thoughts or reflections on that question? Do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Okay. I think there are two problems. One is I already mentioned that these local currencies actually do not put a spanner in the wheel of globalization at all. A Bristol pound is great for Bristol enterprises, but if you go into a Bristol shop and buy stuff from California or China, it doesn't change things, does it? The other reason is, I think that, and this ties in with what we were talking yesterday about grassroots versus centralized control. I think it is a problem if these local currencies are organized by local networks of friends who are enthusiastic for 5 years and then they say, let's quit. I mean, as long as these local currencies are grassroots projects among a club of people who know each other and last only as long as they do, they're going to be ephemeral. So I do think we need to have, and I would agree with Andreas here, who said something like that yesterday, we do need to have some kind of central power organizing this so that it will have a stability over time and will apply to everybody. That would be my response.
Thank you. Ruby, would you like to tap onto that?
Yes. I completely agree about the fact that merely having a local currency with which you could buy stuff from China, etc., that is not it, and that's exactly why we're talking about it. That if we start a local currency, you have to be discussing together that what are its values, what are its principles, what kind of economy it is building, and with that you would definitely be tackling those issues. As to them not working, I think different things have been happening amongst different groups where currencies have been playing. One thing, of course, and that is, for instance, what our story was about, was the fact that we ran into certain legislation issues. I mean, we were growing, whether or not you want to see a time bank as a local currency, but let's do it now. For me, it's a currency. But so our time bank was growing. We were getting more people on board, more exchanges, more organized actors. There were some 40 other ones established in Finland. They were not all, but they were starting. There was an interest in the proposal. And then, as said, we ran into these taxation issues. So the point is that at some point in time, of course, they must find their role in society. You will run into the borders of how you can just autonomously spread yourself. And there needs to be an agreement about how you then solve an issue as, for instance, as taxation. This being said, how you call the process of the group of friends that got together and after 5 years they say they quit might very well be so. That was absolutely not the case for us. And actually, on the contrary, I think it should not stick to a few friends who are obviously not. But I think that the fact that it remains possible for you to be commenting around that currency is completely crucial. Meaning that I enjoy very much the metaphor, this is again Silke Helfrich, who talks about that commons are like crystals. It's not a matter of that they need to be scaling up like we talk about startup businesses, for instance, but instead we should talk about commons as crystals, which could be connecting actually in the same form. I could imagine that there are currencies that, of course, you can have a currency on a national level and then you should also be having something on a global level, that's for sure. But if we're now talking about the local currencies, the fact that people can remain commoning around that currency, I don't see that, I see that as an important act exactly of keeping things going. So I would want to contradict that. I would also want to say there are some really interesting experiences out there. For instance, there's a group in Kenya, I don't know if grassroots economics, the work of Will Rudik and others, doing fantastic works there in Kenya, also in other countries of Africa, actually being in cooperation with Barcelona. Actually, Barcelona, the currency there, has been drawing inspiration from Kenya, and so it's by far, it's things are happening.
Sounds very exciting, but I would like to ask Ole to reflect upon this question as well, because you mentioned war and the production of money for
exactly
inflicting war.
Yeah, so I think if you look into a sort of standard economics textbook about where does money come from and what's the origins of money, what you get is some version of this story of once upon a time there was barter, and then this someone said, okay, let's start using gold or silver, and then they started trading, and that was fine. This is a story about money as a means of payment, and that can sort of lead us to think that, oh yeah, so that's the sort of primordial function of money, is to serve as a means of payment. And I think many local currencies, they're sort of built around this principle. They just think, well, if we just establish this as a means of payment, people will start using it. However, the story you read in textbooks, it's not true. It's at best it's too simple. At worst, it's misleading. So what's missing from that story is debt. So some would argue that there was debt before there was money. And you could also make the case that the primordial or the original function of money was not to pay for goods and services, it was to pay a debt. So the way if you want to kickstart a money system, the first thing you have to do is indebt people. And once they have the debt, they will be like, how can I pay off my debt? And then you invent money and say, here, you can use this. Thank you very much, now I can, So, and I think that's kind of what local currencies need in a way. And I know it sounds like, wow, it's not very pleasant. But I think what they need is state authority. And I think those local currencies which are getting some traction, like the Bristol pound, I think also the Brixton pound, one of the things that really gets them going is once they get the municipality involved, and once you can start paying your taxes in local currencies, that's what you need. Sure. So you need the state or some sort of authority to sort of impose a debt on the community. You owe us money in taxes. Okay, well, fine, we'll use our own money. I think that's kind of what some of the things you kind of need. So you kind of need some sort of power in a way to get money systems going. And I think that's what a lot of local currencies lack.
Thank you. I have one final question before we let the audience in. If we move from the origin of money to the use of money and money as a medium of exchange, I mean, critical social theories often recognize that money changed the way we look upon things. It changed the way we look upon social relationships. It changed the way we look upon ecology and the nature. And you touched upon that in different ways, I would say, but would you like to reflect upon that and kind of summarize your key kind of message when it comes to how the redesign of money can also change the way we actually understand these kinds of relationships? Would you like to start, Ruby?
I think I talked, actually quite a lot indeed about it. Or of course that is a time bank the fact that you come forward with a currency. Actually, well, okay, you could also say that it's simply an accounting. No, actually, the whole community exchange systems platform, it's a way of accounting what people are doing, and it's a way for you to see in a community how this is happening and what is happening. But so the whole fact that you would be exchanging help services on the basis that that is all of equal worth, of course, that makes people profoundly stand still by a lot of things. You enter into such a system, and suddenly you have to pose yourself the question, but is this really going to work okay like that? Is somebody going to be profiting from this? Am I going to be getting what I would be needing? And all these kind of things. So that's why I was also saying that it's really this kind of a pedagogical tool. And then you can come to realize that, hey, we can be coming quite far in operating like this. We don't need to be afraid that if, for instance, somebody doesn't do something as fast as somebody else, we don't need to be, as with the commodity that money is, we don't need to be so afraid of what happens in our accounting system with our time credits. So it's actually, in that sense, it's very very interesting how people then come to relate together with each other. And I think that is for any kind of designing of the currency that happens together. It's a lot about people starting to cooperate and putting the premises different of how that happens between each other and what follows then. So
the commoning argument, basically, that you build a social community around the currency. Ulla, would you like to continue?
Yeah, so I don't know if, I'm sure all of you have had this experience of having a friend or an acquaintance who's this type where you're in a bar and you're among friends and you're kind of like, oh, now I buy this round and you buy the next round. And then all of a sudden there's this one guy who's like, oh, I bought these, now you owe me 50 krona. Now you kind of like, so he's counting and sort of keeping track on who's bought what. And you can't really do it. You kind of have to give him the money, but you also think, what an asshole you are. And I think the kind of money that we have today, this bank money, they kind of banks are that friend, that asshole, because when what banks do, they don't give money into the economy. They can create money, but they won't give it into the economy. They won't even spend it into the economy. They're not drinking beers or anything, or at least that's not how. No. They lend it into the economy, and then they count. You owe me. So they're not encouraged. So what we need money that can sort of that encourages generosity. And I think that's the potential of this e-krone that I was talking about. There's other kinds of. I'm a fan of. I'm like Mao, let the 1,000 flowers bloom, or whatever he said. We don't have to kill people, but we can let all the flowers bloom. Anyway, so but what this e-krone, what this does is that the state has this opportunity to give people money. Just like, here's money, go do whatever, or spend it. I'll build this bridge, or I'll build this park, or something like that. So I think an e-krone has the potential of being such a generous money. So we need this generous money and not this money that the banks are creating.
It has the potential to change social relationships. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think for me, the greatest problem with money is that it projects the kind of illusion of reciprocity. When we go and buy something on the market, we think that we have paid for it, right? And we can go home and we don't have to worry about whatever has gone into making that commodity, people suffering somewhere else, or an ecosystem that's devastated somewhere else. We paid for it, so we're quits, right? And that is the illusion of money. It makes unequal exchange possible. So we need some other metric than money to understand why the world is getting so unequal, more and more for every year. And that's why I've been toying around with this concept of ecologically unequal exchange, to see that money is just a sort of a veil, Marx would have said, for the asymmetric exchange of real material resources. Labor time, embodied land, embodied material, embodied energy, biophysical things. And money gives us the illusion that we're living in a fair world just by going shopping and spending money. And it's, as you all know, it's not a fair world. It's as far from a fair world as it can be. And that is actually the consequence of general purpose money. I would argue it's not a coincidence that economics was invented in Victorian Britain at the height of Britain's colonial power. And neoclassical economics is basically an ideology, and I'm going to provoke some of you, for making neo-colonial structures possible to continue beyond the emancipation and liberation of the colonies. So unequal exchange continues because of the way the world market operates, and that's very much a question of money.
Okay, so let's open up the floor for questions. Let's see, there are some hands here. Should we start the side there? Yeah.
Hi. Can you hear it? Hi. I think I understand what you want to say with money, and I think you have a beautiful use of metaphors. I'm liking the fish in water David Foster Wallace reference there. But I think what you are doing by focusing so much on artifacts is neglecting the moral philosophy around it. So money is essentially a store of value, it's a means of exchange, and it's a unit of account. We can have money for that, we can have turnips, we can have gold, we can have pebbles, we can have shiny stones. There has always been money in that form, and there will always be money. By focusing so much on one artifact, you just risk obliterating that and having it replaced with another. People will always have means of exchange, they will always have a unit of value, they'll always have a unit of measurement. What this slightly reductionist discourse is forgetting, I think, is the fact that our problem is the financialization of life. We have markets in every area of life. That's a concept the philosopher Michael Sandel has been referring to. And instead of wondering, why do we even have a market for this? Why do we have a market for human intimacy? Why do we have a market for relationships, for services, for solidarity? Instead of focusing so much on artifacts, we should question the underlying moral philosophy that's making it possible for money to be used in these ways. And money right now is toxic. Money has to be rethought. But if we keep thinking about money and neglecting the philosophy behind it, then I'm just afraid we're going to replace it with something else. It's going to be a local currency, it's going to be turnips, but I think ultimately we have to rethink the way we relate to artifacts, not the artifacts themselves. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I just briefly respond?
Yeah, I wasn't sure there was a question there, but if you want to...
Oh yeah, it's very probable that I may be misunderstood. When I say artifacts, I don't mean the objects. You know, artifacts, I mean anything that's constructed by humans, including ideas. So the idea that you can exchange things, you know, basically regardless of what they are, is an artifact. It's not the coin or the paper bill or something else. But I agree with you, and I would also add that money was basic to Karl Marx. I mean, if you take MC, M prime, it begins with money. And to be really sacrilegious, I would argue that those 3 volumes of Capital could equally well have been called Money, Volume 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Okay. I knew I'd provoke a lot of people.
Okay, more questions. So there is a hand here on row 5, I think.
Thank you to all the speakers for their really enlightening speeches. One question to all of the 3 speakers. What would be, to your opinion, or what should be, to your opinion, the currency in about 30 years? And what would be the currency in 30 years, to your opinion? So I want to have your wishful vision and your pragmatic assumption on that issue. And why? Thank you.
I can go.
Who wants to start?
E-krone and e-krone.
after e-krone, perhaps. I've come to understand, I mean, we would need probably, I guess they say something like 3 currencies could be something that we could still be handling. And I think that a time bank is a beautiful tool that would be wonderful to see how far it can go. We absolutely have not had the chance to do that. And as said, I think it can become very interesting if we couple that to... I also only recently understood the whole, for instance, the proposal of the unconditional autonomy allowance, where, for instance, there would be local currency connected to getting local food from CSA. So it's a brilliant proposal. Yeah, and then of course also you would need on other levels, as on the national and then the global. But yeah, so I understand it.
Yeah, I don't think the really essential issue is what the currency would you look like or would use. I think the essential thing is to distinguish more than one currency, to have a multi-centric economy. Where are you that put the question? Yeah, I think that's the basic issue, to be able to distinguish the local context from the global market. I don't think markets are problematic in themselves as long as they're local. But time is a great parameter. I mean, I don't think in a local context somebody would be willing to exchange 10 hours of labor for 1 hour of labor. But that's what we're doing when we're buying stuff from China, right? Because we don't see the work and the time that goes into those commodities. So globalization is what makes these unequal exchanges possible. But locally, I think a market would have another logic. You say, oh, I'm not going to spend that on that stuff, you know. Because they know what goes into it. Okay.
Thank you. Should we move over? Feel free to applaud. Should we move over to this side and then gather a few questions and then wrap up after that? So you in green and you with the braces, and then the woman here in front. Should we take those 3 and then wrap up? So if you ask your questions.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for your presentations. I think I wrote like 11 questions at a time, so I will not ask them. But I just want to say that for me, the real emancipation is actually get rid of for me it's a little bit of fetish of like personal accounts, no matter if it's money of any kind, of e-krona or local currency. But even in the community currencies, there is still the individual accounting kind of. No matter if it's in total it's 0 or in total it's like infinite, the numbers. I think, yeah, like before we start discussing, like it's totally fine to have no account, for example, but to still be active in the currency world, that's just a hint to think of.
My name is Rolf Schröder. I think the discussion suffers a little bit from the discussion that we just talk about the one thing, money. But instead we should have, like the Inuit, when they talk about snow, many names for it, or artifacts, if you call it. None of the complementary currencies, or perhaps there's one exception, is involved in the MCM cycle, as you mentioned at ALF. They stand outside the cycle. And they have very different features. The time bank, people usually don't use the term money. They say we do it without money. And time bank scholars refer to anything, to social capital or to social exchange theories, but not to monetary theories. And that's part of a problem, that our language is limited to actually understand what is happening.
Thank you. And let's move over to the final question here.
Thank you for your intervention. That was really, really interesting. My question my question is about debt, because I actually think this is a really, really important topic in money and degrowth and economic growth. So you have this idea of e-krone. This is really interesting, but what do we do about the current debt? What do we do in other countries? What happens with the public debt that we already have?
Thank you. who would like to begin by addressing these three questions together? Ole?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd like to respond to your question and the green question. So with regards to debt, with what we do about the current debt, we do two things. So when we do the transfer, if we do like a full implementation of e-krona instead of bank money, we will need to transfer our existing money from the banks to the central bank. In that process, we're taking the bank's debt to us, and then the central bank is taking over that debt. So now the central bank owes us money. Now, in this transaction, of course, the central bank has to be compensated because it's taking debt off the balance sheet of the banks. So what you could do in the same time was just take an equivalent amount of debt from the banks and move it onto the balance sheet of the central bank. It wouldn't be enough to get rid of all the debt. Like in Denmark, I don't know the figures in Sweden, but in Denmark, the money supply is about 1,100 billion kroner. And the total debt is about 4,000 billion kroners. But you could take a substantial cut of that, and you could actually pick, for instance, say, okay, let's take all of the debt of the agricultural sector and move that onto the central bank. There's plenty of money for that. Their debt is only 400 or 500 billion kroner. And then you would have the central bank would now own the debt of the farmers, and then they could say to the farmers, I don't know if it's as bad here in Sweden, but in Denmark it's very bad. They're so indebted, which is what's keeping them from transitioning into a more sustainable. So the central bank could say to them, now we own all your debt, let's cut a deal. You start farming ecologically or something like that, and then we will kind of give you a good deal on the debt. So that's kind of some of the things you could do. So that would take care of some of the debt. But then gradually, when we issue new money into the economy, we could do it in a way where we made sure that it's sort of people spent at least some of that money to pay down their debts. So over a period of 30 years or we could kind of build down this debt. So that's kind of some of the things we can do with this e-krona. And then to respond to your thing about on the one hand, I kind of agree with this thing that yes, money and these individuals, they're kind of individualizing. However, there's a dark underside to your proposal, because you can't have money, or money and debt is sort of, it's tied together. And what you see in Greece now is that you have collective debt. So if you're born as a child in Greece, you're like, sorry pal, you now owe, I don't know how many, whatever, euros. That's why they're leaving. The young people are leaving, because they're leaving this collective debt. So I think that the problem here is, if you want to sort of accept collective accounts, the question is whether you also need to accept collective debt, and that's maybe less nice in a way. So, but it's not, I mean, I see your point, and I think it does have some merit, but there's also something about it that one has to be quite careful about. Yeah, thank you.
If I continue, yeah, terrible things are happening, of course, globally and in the global south in the name of debt. And actually, for me, a part of this story, for instance, if I was working for a longer time for a foundation in Finland, engaged in development cooperation, and one of our partners was in Mali, and it's just excruciating. I mean, to see how well Mali is a lot of gold, and the gold mines there, what is happening there, and how, of course, why all that extractivist activity. Of course, the link with debt is, of course, number one. And how it is ripping up communities to also go into artificial gold mines for just to try to find something little. And I'm actually hoping at the moment that it will be possible to indeed put out something like local currencies there, which could be preventing that people go for just that little bit of hope of finding some gold, and this all related to debt. So that is something that in very many cases, and that's the campaigning for, needs to be written off because of its links with completely not the possibility to do anything on a national level. And I think it's good to think about the collective, and I think but actually, for instance, the time bank, it's a mutual credit system, so of course there we are -1 +1. The whole system is on a zero, so that's already a different way of doing things and coming much closer to the whole issue of that you're having a collective bank, a collective pool, and how do you then govern that together. So it is very much working against individualizing. It's much more, we for instance deal with questions that, okay, so somebody is at going beyond -50, the whole question is more than can we collectively do something about that and take it away. Yes, this accounting is coming in there from on the accounts, but it's actually only, it's helping us to keep track, but it is very much a collective approach to the whole issue of exchange and what is necessary. And yeah, we do need a lot more other language, and I myself am often quite lost between the words. But kind of why are talking about currency and money? Of course also a lot because you want to reappropriate the whole discussion, and you want to say that with time we can do so much in calling it a currency and talking about money, but you're right about that.
Okay, so Alf, would you like to say something about especially the second question regarding alternative currencies and the MCM formula and how those are separated?
Well, I was just thinking of these 3 questions.
Okay, yeah.
Is it okay?
Feel free to respond to all of them, of course.
Well, very briefly, I mean, I do agree about your point about individual accounting. And I was thinking of Keith Hart. Are you aware of his work? Money in an Unequal World. He's actually an economic anthropologist, but he deals exactly with the possibilities of using electronic money for individual accounting. And I do think, for example, the complementary currency that I propose could very well be organized in terms of electronic individual accounting. So I just agree with you there. And now I don't know enough about these time banks, and you've responded to that, but I imagine would it matter really what kind of currency you would have to represent those hours? Couldn't you have digits in a computer? Yeah, okay. And finally about debt. Have you read David Graeber's book, Debt, The First 5,000 Years? I recommend it. It's a great book. And he's also an economic anthropologist, by the way.
By coincidence.
Coincidence, huh? Well, anyway, he argues that all these ancient civilizations in Mesopotamia and so on, they accumulated huge debts. Like people they got enslaved because of their debt. And then every time there was a new emperor put in place, the first thing he did was they had a jubilee. All debts were canceled. Everybody was free. And and the problem is, why is that a moral issue for us? It is a moral problem for us. Well, you have to pay your debts, right? This is how he begins his book. Well, you have to pay your debts. And still we think that, these people who lend money to us are really moral culprits. So this is a paradox in our understanding of credit. But okay, let's imagine a jubilee of some kind, maybe a financial crisis, or the money bubble just bursting. I don't think that would be such a bad idea, really. I'm reminded of this archaeologist who once wrote that, you can think of civilizational collapse in different ways. And some people who experienced the fall of Rome probably felt that it was a tax relief. So I'm thinking in a similar way about our indebted global society. What if we got rid of all these debts? Wouldn't we be free? That's what David Graeber would argue. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Time is flying. I'm sure there are many more questions here, but unfortunately, we have to leave them for the party where we can continue this debate. So let's finish off by giving the speakers here a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.